Still getting used to this new setup here with the table and everything. All right, that should do. Sweet. Celebrating. Have to. All right, let's do it. It is the 200 level. Mike Carpenter in the basement studio on Saturday, November 30th. I am a fan of a football program that won 9 regular season games. I don't really know where to begin. We'll talk about the game itself later, which was the typical kind of rivalry game that you get with Northwestern, which is to say annoying for a lot of it, but Illinois made just enough big plays to win by double digits. The lead, though, is that you've won 9 regular season games in the 4th year of Bret Bielema, coming off of a 5-7 record. That's the lead. So, yes, there will be times in this podcast where I'm critical of, well, one side of the ball more than the other. But I don't want that to be misconstrued as any sense of unhappiness with where this program's at. I'm ecstatic. It is unbelievable to be in this position where I have a 9-3 football team that I root for that will be playing, in all likelihood, on New Year's Eve in Orlando in the Citrus Bowl, the thing that I grew up watching every New Year's Day. I think it would kick off at 11 a.m. or noon Central, and it was always the Michigans, it was the Wisconsins, it was the Iowas, the Ohio States, the Penn States, and now it's us, and it's earned. Yeah, there were some close wins in this 9-win season, but this is an earned 9-3 record where your only losses are to 2 playoff teams and a halfway decent Minnesota team. So that 9-win record, I'm going to really hover on that for most of this podcast and also just kind of look back at this season as a whole. This is going to go very macro, just to let you guys know, and it is going to be very celebratory, as those in the YouTube feed can tell, with my little sifter here of George Dickel whiskey. Now, there's a story behind this whiskey. My good friend Andrew was over, and we watched the game together. I had a White Russian for the first half, which is a game day staple for me. I always have a White Russian. And that was really it for the game. But as we were closing things out and it was clear that Illinois was going to go win it, I grabbed this George Dickel bottle. It's column still, so it's not just regular George Dickel. And my friend Andrew had brought this down the Kansas weekend. And we opened it up and we had a little sifter together. And I told him, how cool is it to think that back in the Kansas weekend, when we were just hoping to go 2-0, so you'd be in a better position to make a bowl game, that 3 months later, we would be sitting in my basement watching Illinois get their 9th win of the year and secure a spot in the Citrus Bowl. Now, I didn't say that verbatim necessarily. Andrew, and then I recounted every single word. I don't know if I said that verbatim, but I do know that the feeling that I got when Illinois clearly put that game away and went back up 3 possessions in the 4th quarter was more than just relief that we didn't lose to Northwestern again, which is all too common for Illinois football in the last 20, 30 years. But it was much more joy and gratitude, to be quite honest, at the fact that we are rooting for a football program that is relevant again. Now, that's not to say that Bret Bielema's program is not going to have some ups and downs, but when you raise the floor so significantly, where this team, flaws and all, can go 9-3, I do think that as a fan base, it allows you to take a deep breath and realize, wait a second, we are not doomed to any sort of fate. There's no curse, there's no jinx, there's nothing that is written in the stars that says that Illinois football cannot be a good football program. And to me, the weight off my shoulders from just that simple fact goes far beyond relief. And as I said, it's much more to do with joy, gratitude, all that. So we're sitting here, and I'm watching other football games, just like I will next Saturday, Championship Saturday. And no, Illinois is not going to be in the Big Ten championship game. I don't need that, though. In fact, I can sit back blissfully happy and know that my team basically has their postseason secured. And more than that, has a really bright future ahead, or so it appears from a roster that doesn't have many seniors on it, and a coaching staff that, despite some criticisms that I will levy here in a bit, I think overall is a strong coaching staff, and it does start at the top. So Bret Bielema in year 4, getting Illinois to this point, is pretty remarkable. And to think about this season, too, it's not just that you won 9 games. It's the fact that you did have, along the way, a few marquee moments. Now, the 2 games that will always stand out to me will be the Kansas win, week 2. Sold-out crowd, just electric atmosphere, the Xavier Scott pick six that really changed the tenor of that game in the second quarter, and then you go on to win. The Michigan weekend, for my money, is one of the best football weekends I will probably ever have, if not my all-time favorite. And I've seen some, maybe not as many as other fan bases. We are Illini fans after all, but I can go back to the Rose Bowl year and the consecutive Penn State-Wisconsin weekends. I can go to 2001 and the homecoming win against Wisconsin. I can cherry pick some. But for me, there is no day as an Illini football fan that was more perfect than that one. I mean, that alone is the kind of day that as a fan you live for and you just hope that you can experience. And we got that in the middle of this 9-win season to go 6-1. But I think most importantly, while this is not a single game or anything, and certainly we can look at the Pat Bryant touchdown against Rutgers as a singular moment, but it was the fact that they won their last 3 games to do away with what I felt was like the last bugaboo of the Bret Bielema era so far, which is not so great Novembers. And it wasn't always pretty, and it wasn't always easy, but you won your last 3 games. And you beat 3 teams that you probably should have beaten, scoring 38 points in all of them, by the way. So kudos to the offense. So what a place to be. 2024, I would like to think, is a year that we'll look back on as the true beginning of the Bret Bielema era. 2022 was not isolated, but it was an example of what it could be. 2024 now, 4 years in, with a lot of things much more established than they were 2 years ago, hopefully indicates to us that this is, if not the new norm, something that we can actually grow to expect on occasion from a Bret Bielema program. A 9-3 season, something that was just so rare for this football program. They got it this year with not the easiest schedule by beating the teams they should have. And if you really think about it, getting a couple of wins that maybe they outplayed more talented teams. I don't think Kansas won today against Baylor. I'm not sure. YouTube feed, maybe you can update me on that. But take Michigan. It's not as if they weren't without talent. And yeah, you got the Jack Tuttle game, so that was in your favor. But you beat Michigan 21-7. You beat them soundly. Your line play was better than Michigan that game. And then what do you see today? They go to Columbus, and they end Ryan Day's career, essentially. So that's nothing to sneeze at. Just very happy right now. And before I hit the sponsors, a cheers to those that are tuning in. Cheers to you, George Dickel. Oh, that's good stuff. And worth it. If it were not 25 degrees, we'd be in the garage having a cigar as well. So, hello, YouTube feed. I want to hear your thoughts macro here. Illinois is 9-3. How are you feeling? Please send those in. I will get to all of them. And just as an Illini football fan, how it feels to be in this moment right now. I mean, just compare and contrast yourselves with Ohio State. And it's kind of funny because as a Yankees fan, I can empathize a little bit. Don't worry, not too much, but a little bit with Ohio State fans. Depending on who you root for, there are different expectations. So for Ohio State, 9-3 would be a disaster. For Illinois, it's anything but. But I do think that along the way, with any frustrations we've had with Illinois football, we've always been reasonable about what we hoped for. Always been reasonable about that. Never talked about national titles or really even Big Ten championships that much. Just give me a good football program. And now that it feels like we have it, how are you feeling, Illini fans? That's my question for those that have tuned in today. All right, before I get too far ahead of myself, got to remind you the 200 level is brought to you by Hamilton Walkers, downtown Champaign, steak, seafood, and spirits. What better place to have a celebratory dinner than Hamilton Walkers? There's something about that place when winter hits. I mean, any steakhouse for that matter, but the inside of Hamilton Walkers is especially cozy this time of year. It's a scratch kitchen, so no matter what you order, they are making it from scratch in that kitchen. Best chefs in town and the best bartenders in town. Celebratory old-fashioned after the 9th win of the season, not a bad idea. That's Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign, steak, seafood, and spirits. Also got to thank State Farm agent Brian Hansen online at brianismyguy.com for life, auto, home, business renters, you name it. Brian is my guy, and he can be your guy as well. I'm sure Brian, super pumped by what he saw today. Well, I should rephrase. Maybe the game, all 60 minutes, was not something we were always excited about. I was a little bit puckered up at parts of that. But I do know the fan that Brian is very happy for the 9th win. Great person to work with for our homeowners and auto insurance. That's State Farm agent Brian Hansen online at brianismyguy.com. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Give them a call, 217-841-4728. That's Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. We got our furnace check from them a couple weeks ago, and thank goodness we did, because it is working excellently in what is otherwise a very, very cold weekend. So that's Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. Finally, Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. And you can check out a gallery of their excellent work online and get a free quote while you're at it from owenbuildersllc.com. Was interacting with Luke, or saw Luke quite a bit on Twitter today during the game. Listen, overall celebratory, a few frustrations along the way. We'll get to those again. We're going to keep it much more macro, though. It is always better to be in a place of 9-3 and still able to criticize aspects of the team or of the program, but know that overall the strength of it is far better than it has been. So again, I'm kind of prefacing this because early in the game when Aaron Henry's defense was just giving up yardage after yardage after yardage, and I said, this is not good enough. And then Mike Cagley, I think Cagley is his last name, from Illini guys, kind of sent what could be construed as a snarky tweet. Like, oh yeah, sucks to have 9 wins. And it's like, can we not look at things nuanced here? And that's what I try to do, though I will admit to letting emotion get the best of me sometimes. But as I replied to him, we can be happy on one hand with the macro and still find micro things that we would like to see improved. If we want this to sustain, you always have to be in the process of improvement. I do think that Bret Bielema is aware of that. I think that there will be things that he looks at in the offseason, probably not to the tune of firing anybody, let alone a coordinator, but I do think there will be adjustments made because he probably knows that there has to be. I think he probably does. Nonetheless, 9-3. Okay, so I talked about this season. I'm reflecting back on how it started on a Thursday night against Eastern Illinois. By far the hottest day that we had at the stadium that year, and yet the night game actually made it not a big deal. So we had an after-school meeting until about 4 o'clock, and then fortunately, someone that I work with, I'd already gotten the car over at lunch for tailgating, and then my mom was able to bring me back to school. Look at me, 38 years old, still getting driven around by my mom. And then a co-teacher brought me back to the lots for what was basically an expedited tailgate from 4 to 7 o'clock, or 7:30 because the game was at 8. And I remember just my mindset from the beginning to, let's say, halftime of that game changed in those 30 minutes. First game, a lot of overreactions. I was trying not to have one, but Eastern was making a drive down the field and got, I think, within the red zone, but Illinois either made a play or they eventually forced them back to a missed field goal. Regardless, Illinois pitched a shutout that game. They go on to win handily. And the offense impressed me enough to think that, okay, like this is a team that I think can beat Kansas. And going into that second weekend, it was simply, you got to beat them. I mean, I remember the mindset I took was, I'm not going to look too much into matchups or anything. Quite simply, this is a game that Bret Bielema and this program need. And just based off of that, I'm going to predict an Illinois win. Sometimes the team that needs it the most, that wants it the most, they just go get it done, and they did. In what was a super memorable day at Memorial Stadium, you get 3-0 with a rather ho-hum 31-10, 31-9 victory over Central Michigan. But really, and I forgot to mention this in the opening segment, the win at Nebraska. Yeah, I know they're only 6-6. They didn't have the season that they probably wanted to, and they kind of blew it against Iowa last night. But that was a big win at a crucial moment for this team because 3-1 we all feel fine about. You had Penn State looming, though, and you knew that your chances there were probably not great. The way that Illinois closed that game against Nebraska, well, really opened and closed it. It was a 3rd down and long or a 4th down, and they found Pat Bryant along the sideline for a 20-yard gainer, set the tone, and then from there the offense played, I think, their best overall game of the season, only punted it once or twice maybe, and then the defense, to their credit, really tightened up in the 4th quarter and overtime. Well, especially overtime when you forced a 4th and 30, whatever. That Nebraska game was huge. 4-0, go on the road, you lose to Penn State. Okay, outclassed, understandable. You hung in there. You were tied in the 4th quarter, weren't you? Or had a chance to go tied in the 4th quarter. You will take that. You will take that any day of the week. And then I think the bye week came after that. Now, there were a couple scary moments this year. Today, to a lesser extent, though, if you're being honest with yourself, there were moments in that game where you thought, oh, dear God, this cannot happen again. The Purdue game, though, was just a coin flip away from an existential crisis. For me personally, and maybe for some of you. The possibility of losing that game, it became all too real during the third and fourth quarter, big play after big play, and to come down to a second or a 2-point conversion, which thankfully you stopped. And credit to the defense for making a good play on that. You just exhaled. You said, we're 5-1. Okay. And it's amazing how football, from a week-to-week basis, can just be a tale of two teams, because Illinois comes out and I think overall plays the most complete game on all facets against Michigan. Yes, a Michigan team lacking a quarterback, but nonetheless, you beat them 21-7. The game was rarely in doubt. Sure, the fake punt, that was the game-changing moment. But even then, you were still leading. It was simply a case of taking a larger lead at that point. And all three phases played well to get you to 6-1. Then you go to Oregon. Okay, your bad game of the year. Then you come back home against Minnesota, somewhat lifeless. To me, this is where the season is kind of hanging in the balance in terms of, is it going to be merely good or potentially great? And I say great by Illinois standards. Of course, not great for a team that is looking for a college football playoff appearance. But for Illinois, yeah, 9-3 is great. I will say that without any sort of shame. It just is. So to come back after the bye week and do what you had to do, especially in the second half against Michigan State, 38-16. The Rutgers game, your one game, two if you count Purdue, your second game of the year where you escaped. Why? Because you have a stud quarterback and you have a stud wide receiver. Pat Bryant, Luke Altmaier, I don't want to say bailed you out, but kind of in those two games. But guess what? They're on your team. This happens in college football. Don't apologize for snatching victory from the jaws of defeat, especially as an Illini fan, when it's been the inverse of that for so much of our fandom. And then today, you got the job done. Aiden Lawfrey, unbelievable. Not quite McCullough Shore yardage totals, but the three essentially home runs that he hit, long runs where once he got to the second level, he was gone. Great patience, great cuts, hard to tackle in open space. Good for him after what was a not great start to the year, probably because he wasn't 100%. Pat does tie the record. We'll see if he plays a bowl game, then he could break it. There was something said after the game where Bret Bielema mentioned Pat Bryant talking to the team and saying, let's go get that 10th win, something along those lines. Now, don't ever read into an emotional response by a player after a game. He's got a decision to make, and one that I would not begrudge him at all if he says, I don't want to risk anything in a bowl game. You let him make that call, and without him, we aren't 9-3. What a way for this kid to solidify a legacy at Illinois, when last year he was good, not great, and actually had a little bit of a case of the dropsies the last couple years, but not this year. Just an out-and-out stud. Really happy for Pat. Wish he would have gotten 1,000 yards. I don't think he quite did, and YouTube feed, he could correct me on that. I think he needed 80 and got somewhere around 50 yards. And just to finish today the way that you did, by coming out with Aiden Lawfrey's run in the second half, which to me was the key moment of the game, when it felt like momentum, despite you leading at halftime, was kind of the Northwestern side. And then he got the stop. And then did you get a score right after that? Regardless, you go up by as much as 28-10. Yeah, and then they make it interesting. Go figure. But then you close the game well. So, all in all, 9-3 and earned 9-3. Yeah, a couple games that went to the very end, and you were the team that just made plays. But guess what? When you consider the way those were not going for you in the first couple years of Bret Bielema's tenure, could we say that it's all averaged out? The good news for Illinois fans is it's averaged out in your favor. Now you're winning more of these games than you're losing. To me, that is a sign of a program that is maturing. Guys that are used to being in tight late game situations. And we know this from watching college football. It is a game where the margins are super slim most of the time. NFL even more so. That's the way that league is structured, all that parity. But you really see that in college football if you are not a top 5, top 10 certifiable team. Everything else is kind of a muddled mess. And unfortunately, given where we are as a program right now, we'll be in that muddled mess for a while. The goal for Illinois as a program, though, is to establish within this muddled mess, we are the top tier of that mess. We can take over for whatever Iowa's been the last 26 years under Kirk Ferentz, because that's not going to last forever. And I'm sorry, at a certain point, is that even sustainable? They can't score, but it doesn't matter. Well, eventually, I do think it probably will What an opportunity, though, for Bret Bielema in this era where, yeah, there's the haves and have-nots, but the good news for Illinois is that if you aren't Ohio State, Oregon, I guess to a lesser extent Michigan, and they're going to keep Sharon Moore after this. The good news, Illinois fans and Big Ten fans, Sharon Moore might have bought himself a few years with just that win today against Ohio State, whatever. Then it's a unique opportunity to say, Wisconsin and Luke Fickell, move aside. Matt Rule in Nebraska, move aside. Minnesota, they're fine. Iowa, still Iowa. But, there is that whole area in the Big Ten between teams 5 and 14 or 15. It's a soft zone right there that I think you can exploit. And I think that you can become that number 5, number 6 team if you play your cards right. So far, for the most part, Bret Bielema has certainly done that. All right. Let's hit the chat thread here. Hello, everybody. From K. Andrew, Brett the Builder. Yes, he needs a DC. Let's talk about that after this comment, K. Andrew. But my God, what he showed us and made us believe we could be since he got here. I'm more often critical of Lunny than most, but another great game by him, dialing Luke back to game manager when that's all the team needed, a QB in the second half. Still awestruck by Lunny, setting up the Lawfrey draw play, TD, with the RPO to Bryant. Sheer artistry like a pitcher setting up a circle change up low and away with a hard slider middle end. Excellent stuff, K. Andrew. And yeah, you've been critical of Aaron Henry. You've been critical of Barry Lunny. I've been less critical of Barry Lunny because I overall like what he brings to the table. And, man, when I'm watching Iowa, Nebraska last night, even more so, it is a legit Big Ten offense. And I would agree with your assessment that what was best about Lunny's game plan today, and what I often like about him, he tends to call the game in front of him. Take Michigan, for example. 21 points. Not setting the world on fire. You probably could have scored more if you would have finished some of those drives. I thought Barry Lunny played the game in front of him against Michigan. It was kind of a time of possession game. You knew that Michigan, were not in any position to score a whole lot of points. So what's your job as an offense? Run the ball effectively and get a few touchdowns and get out of there with a win. He did that. Today, I agree. In the second half, the adjustments he made when you could tell Luke was being a little too loose with it, and a passing game is usually more difficult in the cold air than if it weren't 20 degrees. I thought that tweak by him ultimately helped you win the game. And Aiden Lawfrey, yeah, he had to go make those runs, but that draw, especially in the second half, third quarter, second play of that drive right after the 6-yard completion to Bryant, that's good stuff. I'm a big Lunny fan. I will not hide that. Big Tota says, yeah, baby. That's right, Big Tota. Stephen Colbert, Illinois won and OSU lost in hilarious fashion. Today was a good day. Cheers to that, Stephen. All right, Big Tota K. Andrew doing the ILL-INI from our dog. Hey, Russell, good to see you, bud. Hey, Mike, remember you signed my basketball and football jersey? I do, and I appreciate you stopping by the tailgate a few times this year. Was that not a perfect year of tailgating, by the way? You go 6-1 at home, great weather throughout. All I've wanted is to be able to wake up on college football Saturdays and be excited to go to Lot 31, beyond just the party. And we have that now. So, yeah, that another just macro kind of observation I have about where this program's at. All right, let's see who else we got in here. From Big Tota, 9-3 is nothing to scoff at. With the flaws, we still pulled out the close games that in past years did not go our way. The entire fan base should be ecstatic. Here, Big Tota. No slump November, indeed. From Gregory Helton, Kansas got smoked. Wait. Okay, yeah, that's right, because Sean came after that to say they won. No, they did not. As Stephen Colbert put it, they had the yips against Baylor. Yikes. All right. What else we got here? From Peyton. Sitting here ecstatic, but imagining what the discourse is like today with the Minnesota win. Peyton, I don't think this Illinois team is college football playoff worthy, and I don't mean that as a slight. It's just, let's be honest. They're top 20. Are they top 12? No. You beat Minnesota. I think that you're in the conversation, but I think without that marquee win, you probably still don't get there above an Indiana at 11-1, assuming they beat Purdue, which I think they will handily. And I think, as we saw with Vegas today, making that spread 7.5, which I thought was too light. Unfortunately, you did cover. You won by 10. But I think you saw from Vegas something that reflected the overall view of Illinois from college football fans. Yeah, they're cute. That's a fun year. Are they actually a playoff team? Probably not. We never really got the serious consideration. So even with the Minnesota win, I wonder if you're on the outside looking in. I don't want to say that loss helped us cut off our nose to spite our face. In other words, avoid an embarrassment in the college football playoff, which, by the way, could still happen at the Citrus Bowl if you play a hungry SEC team. I just think the advantage is this. Of course, I'd rather be in a college football playoff, but if you are in the Citrus Bowl against an Alabama that just got left out of the CFP and 20 Alabama players, which is not really an exaggeration, 15 to 20 say, I'm not risking injury in a non-playoff game, and you get a team that's just not as excited to be there as you, I think those things matter when it comes to bowl games. So Peyton not making the playoff, not a huge thing to me. I know Bret Bielema was talking after the game that, hey, we're in the conversation, and yes, you will be in the top 20 perhaps of the final college football playoff rankings, which is an amazing accomplishment, but you were not probably going to make it in, and that is okay. From Andy, man, it's so great to have a competent football team. I would have been happy with 6 wins, but I'm completely over the moon. We got to 9 and won both trophy games. Thank you, Andy, for mentioning that. You get the hat, you get the cannon. Thank God. I know the hat had only been gone a year, the cannon far longer than that. There is something about beating your rivals, and these are protected rivalries. Sometimes I think as well, there is a hump that you have to get over in these games. Maybe that's why with Purdue it took you every bit of that game, including overtime, to finally beat them. That is difficult to turn the tide when a rivalry has gone a certain way for so long. And even with beating Northwestern handily the first 2 years of Bielema's tenure, losing last year seemed to kind of reset this, oh, God, we're playing Northwestern. I even felt that today. I tweeted out, boy, God, I hate playing Northwestern. I do, because it feels like every time it's the same thing, no matter how mediocre they may be. Sometimes maybe just getting over that hump in a rivalry game goes a long way. From Big Toda, the macro word of the day for me is healthy, as in a healthy program that is on an upward trajectory and pushing the Illini status quo. Well done. Thanks, Big Toda. From Ron, love the fact that my Illini are going to come and visit me in Orlando as they did in Tampa in 22. Ron, enjoy. I will be around for sure. Hi, Ben. Oh, God. Good old inside jokes. Okay, now, while we are feeling good, let's talk about a concern. Okay. I would think that I'm speaking for most fans when I say we're not probably convinced of the long-term viability of Aaron Henry at defensive coordinator. Now, the tricky thing to assess with this, how good is the defense talent-wise? Are they great? No, probably not. We saw sometimes they had difficulty getting to the quarterback, even when Aaron Henry was drawing up blitzes. So I appreciated that Aaron went with a more aggressive style, especially it felt like in the second half, but there were still moments where he would only send 3. And that makes me want to pull my hair out. But then, if I am being fair about it, if you're sending 5 and not getting the quarterback, why not try to force an interception, dropping 8 against a guy like Jack Lausch? I know you can't do the same thing every play. You mix it up. I know he was trying to do that. But when it comes to play calling, clearly there is something lacking. And we saw that to the tune of about 440 yards for Northwestern today, which is just too much. It's just simply too much. And I'm going to make sure that I get these notes correct here from Illini Stats and Notes, which is on Twitter at Illini Stats. Where is that box score? Box score. Here we go. So just to make sure I get this right, Northwestern with 442 total yards, 329 through the air. And that's Jack Lausch, who's not good. And he did turn the ball over twice with interceptions. And wasn't there a fumble there as well? Regardless, not a good quarterback. And yet, still moved the ball fine on you. You gave up 119 yards to A.J. Henning. They're one guy that when Kurtz went out, you knew you had to defend A.J. Henning. And you get, I think, 8 or 9 different receivers in on the action here for Northwestern. Now, you won the game. That last touchdown for Northwestern, you let them waste a lot of time. At that point, you're just winning the game. Okay, do we count the 4th touchdown or not? But still, this is a Northwestern team that struggled to score in every other Big Ten game, other than Maryland, when it was a lot of defensive scores and Maryland just giving the ball at will. So I am concerned that without any change, your defense will be your Achilles heel next year. You survived a not-so-good defense in the Big Ten this year, because I know the stats would say that they were serviceable, but in Big Ten play, this defense was not very good outside of the Michigan game, the second half of Nebraska, and the second half of Michigan State. You could say that they kept the Penn State game close. That would be fair. However, Penn State yardage-wise, it felt like, God, why is Penn State not just putting their foot on our neck. They just seem to be unable to do that. Some credit to the defense for that. But overall, it felt like when you needed your defense to be stout, especially in the second half of the season, they had a harder time doing that. And it just worries me going forward that you could potentially lose momentum because of a coordinator who is not a good play caller. Sometimes I don't think that the game plan itself is that bad from Aaron Henry. You didn't let Jack Lausch go too crazy running it today. He got 22 yards rushing. As a team, Northwestern got 113. They averaged 3.9 yards per carry. Okay, fine. You can live with that, even though they only got 10 yards at Michigan. Different matchup, but nonetheless. I just worry, though, that you're still, as a program, not in a place where you can say, we've arrived, so therefore, no worries, we're going to win a bunch of games every year. You aren't there yet. Aaron Henry is a flawed coordinator who I don't think has figured out quite what he is yet, and I don't think that you can afford as a program to have him be the only guy running this thing. You are not going to fire him. Let's be honest about that. Aaron Henry's not going to get fired. Okay, so what do you do? Well, before the season started, you went and got David Gibbs, who was an experienced assistant. He ends up leaving Illinois. He's at Arizona State. They seem to be doing okay right now. You need to get somebody that can help him out. Jim Leonard, I guess, was not that last year. But if you are going to keep Aaron Henry, get somebody else on that staff that can give him some tutelage or something. Because if he's still growing as a coordinator, which I don't like the idea of a coordinator having to grow into that role. I mean, it's the Big Ten. You got to be ready to go. I just can't trust an Aaron Henry defense. And I think in your heart of hearts, you probably can't either. So don't mistake criticisms that I levy towards Aaron Henry as a defensive coordinator as an indictment against this program. You're 9-3. Celebrate that. Make a bowl game next year, which you should with Luke Altmaier back as a senior quarterback and a lot of sophomores and juniors being a year older. That should be a bowl team. Plain and simple. And they don't need to go 9-3 next year. They can go 7-5 or 8-4. But is that really what Bret Bielema's ultimate goal is? I think he probably aspires to more, and I just hope that he's honest with himself into the season, after the bowl game. What can I do to keep getting better? Because if anything, I will give Bielema credit for this. He has shown a willingness to make changes. Tony Peterson, after 1 year, wasn't cutting it. Gone. I felt like Aaron Henry, after last year, should have been gone. Regardless of the personnel issues, they were just so bad. I felt like that's your opportunity. But when he kept him, then the question becomes, okay, well, how else are you going to patch those holes on that side of the ball? You have an opportunity after a 9-3 regular season to do that with everybody still feeling good about your program. I just really hope he does. I hope that's a fair criticism to levy and not out of bounds or anything when it comes to that. So that's my Aaron Henry spiel. Concerned, yes. I'm not concerned about Barry Lunny. I think that you have an offense that is more than functional. I think we saw today with the explosiveness, albeit against a Northwestern team, you saw some really good play calling, sometimes passing, setting up the run, as Kay Andrew alluded to with that Pat Bryant 6-yarder, and then you get the draw play for a touchdown from Aiden Moffrey. Great blocking, too, for the most part. I mean, there were a couple lulls there in the third quarter, I felt like, from the offensive line, but for the most part, run blocking, pass blocking, they look good. Defensively, you almost got a lot of takeaways. You got a few already, but it felt like there were another 2 or 3 on the table there. And I'm trying to think, was there one? The pass interference against Torrey Cox when he intercepted it. I'm sorry, but not trying to be a homer, that didn't really feel like that much of a pass interference to me. I know Matt Millen, who, my God, did that announcing crew just suck today. And I don't like to do that to announcers because they're just doing their best. Matt Millen sounds like he's on death's door or something. I don't know what I was listening to, and everything they said was about the most obvious thing that could have been added. You could have had the Big Ten Network Plus College of Media kids that had never done a game before. I would have gotten just as much out of it as I did from those 2 guys on the Big Ten Network. That was only increasing my annoyance when this game was close. But you know what? When he pulled away, I was a little bit less annoyed. Sorry, sometimes I just get a little fired up. Okay, 9-3, you beat Northwestern. We're looking now, I got the Penn State-Maryland game on. Penn State starting to pull away, so that means they will, if they haven't already, they are certainly in the college football playoff. Indiana, if they win tonight, college football playoff. Ohio State, college football playoff. This would mean Penn State is going, of course, to, is that correct? That they would be going, One-loss team going to the Big Ten title game against Oregon because Ohio State with 2 losses in the Big Ten. So there you go. Ohio State, they will still be in the playoff, probably get a home game as the 7th or 8th seed. Maybe they drop to 9, 10, 11, or 12. Whatever happens to them, they are not winning that playoff game. They're done. Ryan Day is done. And everybody in that building knows it, and that will reflect in when they get their butts kicked by whoever they play in the first college football playoff game that they're lucky enough to play in. So here we are, looking straight at a Citrus Bowl appearance. And again, I got from the sifter, I got to just take a little Georgie Diggle for that. Already planning my Orlando trip. Got a place to stay. Flights out of Indy, not bad at all. I'm going to wait until it's confirmed on Sunday. I should say next Sunday before I would reserve any flights or anything like that. But, you know, what a position to be in where before the season, if you tell me Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit, I'm okay with it. My preseason prediction was 6-6 based on the fact that I think Luke Altmaier was going to have a good season. I thought the defense could maybe be slightly better, just enough to help you win these games. It is actually kind of remarkable to me that for a defense that sometimes this season looked like they couldn't really stop the opponent, that you still went 9-3. And to me, what that says is most every little thing that a program has to do right in order to win games, this program is doing. That is something that I'm just not used to as an Illini fan. If anything, I was used to us doing all the little things incorrectly. And sometimes teams like Ron Zook's, for example, in 2008, in 2009, a 3-win team that probably should have won 7 or 8 based on their talent, these teams that were loaded and should have been competing for 4th, 5th place in the Big Ten, getting nowhere close because he had a coach that just wasn't good at his job. I'll still get in arguments sometimes. Not arguments, just very civil, with some family friends that think Zook should have never been fired based on the fact that Tim Beckman was terrible. And I always try to tell them, 1, Ron Zook was not a good coach. We know that. 2, the recruiting was falling off anyway. And if you feel like you need to patch gaping wounds with Band-Aids like they did with his coordinators in 2010 and 11, then that is not a coach worth keeping. The problem for Illinois was what came after. Tim Beckman, even worse. You have the 1 year with Bill Cubit, weird stopgap, he did what he could, and then you kept him, but fortunately, Josh Whitman comes in and he swings for the fences, which unfortunately failed in spectacular fashion with Lovie Smith. But you know what? I can't begrudge Josh that move because I was pretty excited about that. I do distinctly remember, though, when they were on the verge of hiring Bret Bielema, and it was either Bielema or Lance Leipold. And as we're sitting here 4 years in, you would honestly have to say that Bret Bielema is probably the better pick. I don't want to overreact to Kansas having a 5-win season as opposed to the 7 or 8 or even 9 that they were projected to get this year. But I do think that Bret Bielema, because of that experience at this level, probably was able to weather that storm better than Kansas was under Lance Leipold. Not to dismiss what Leipold has done, but it was smaller school, working his way up the ranks. Bret Bielema knows what it's like to win in the Big Ten. And the reason I was optimistic when he was hired is because we didn't need him to be Wisconsin good Bret Bielema. We didn't need that. We could have taken anything between his Wisconsin Bielema and Arkansas Bielema, and whatever came out of that would be plenty for Illinois fans. And I think that's the truth. But there is the possibility, and this is what's exciting after winning your 9th game of the year, there is the possibility that Bret Bielema, as he has said himself before in press conferences, is giving Illinois the best version of himself. Personally, professionally, all that. I don't want to get too, how would I say? I don't want to make this a fluff piece about Bret Bielema and say that, well, you're getting the best version of the man. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Frankly, I don't care too much about that. I just care about if our head coach can help us win games. But I do think there's something about learning as you go, learning as you get older. And what encourages me about Bret Bielema, for someone that has been a head coach for a long time, has been his willingness, especially in this last offseason, where for a little bit there I wasn't sure what the path was going forward. They navigated that transfer portal. They addressed areas of need, and they went 9-3. And that's even striking out on who you thought would be your shutdown corner in Terrence Brooks. Did he even play today? I don't know what happened. But think about what that says, right? Every other evaluation you made in the portal basically worked out. Torrey Cox from Ohio, was it? Ohio Bobcats, comes in, is your starting corner for most of the year. You have J.C. Davis and Melvin Priestley anchor that line. And I know they weren't perfect this year, but you could do worse at offensive line than what Illinois did this year. You don't go 9-3 with a subpar offensive line. They were fine. Not spectacular. They were fine. And your tackles were pretty darn good throughout. Zachary Franklin, he had one drop today. I don't remember another drop from Zachary this year. Maybe he had one other. But what a pickup. No, he didn't have outlandish, crazy numbers. But by having him on the other side of the ball, that opened things up for Pat Bryant even more. You can go down the list about these transfer additions, and it's not just going out and getting dudes. It's getting dudes that fit. And we see this with Underwood to a very high level with this basketball team. As Maryland turns it over again, boy, they stink. Side note. You see this also happening north of Kirby Avenue. And in this climate, how big is that? To have a coach that you feel comfortable with going into the portal, using the funds allocated to him for NIL. So I will say there are two givens right now for Illinois football. You got your head coach, and I think you got your offensive coordinator. That means you have some work to do in the offseason to feel even better about your defense. But, man, that is not a bad place to start, and you went 9-3 for a reason. There's not much fluky about this. There's not much fluky about winning games late. That is a program that puts itself in position to win these games late. And just kudos to Bret Bielema. And would it be beyond me to say thank you? Not to sound like a kiss ass or anything, but thank you, Bret Bielema, for making Illinois football fun again. I'm looking forward to the Citrus Bowl. We might get our ass kicked. I don't know. I want to see what we do against an SEC team that doesn't really want to be there. I'm going to Disney the next day anyway, so who cares? I'm going to be in Orlando over New Year's. That's 2 Florida Bowl games in 3 years. Essentially the Outback, which I still call it that, not ReliaQuest, but the Outback and the Citrus Bowl. For Illinois football, 2 out of 3 years. That's what good programs do. Yes, I would have much rather have also gone to the Quick Lane Bowl last year to make it 3 in a row. This team is a whisker's edge away from 4 straight bowl games. So now you got to ask yourself, okay, did we get over a proverbial hump where next year, if it is a down year, it's not 5-7, but maybe 6-6, right? We did not see with Bret Bielema, and I think this is okay. We didn't see some exponential growth where they go from 1 win to 9, or like Ron Zook did from 2 to 9. I don't mind that. I don't mind a little bit more gradual kind of thing where you're seeing it unfold in front of you and you're starting to see the seeds of a sustainable program. And that's how I feel right now. It's not going to be easy next year or the year after that. I don't know if it's ever going to be easy for Illinois football. But I do think that college football, no matter how this NIL era goes, is still going to be a sport where a lot of games are won in close fashion, and it just comes down to which team does less stupid things. And for the most part, Bret Bielema's teams do less stupid things than their opponents. That's why they're 9-3. Speaking of that, let's see. Today, penalties for Illinois, 7 for 50. Not great, but far better than last week. Some of those just false starts, things like that, but not the 80, 90 yards that they had last week. Clean it up a little bit. But again, just less stupid things than their opponents. You look at takeaways or turnovers there for, 4 for Northwestern, 2 for you, uncharacteristic from Luke. And he still bounced back, found Pat Bryant, and Barry Lunny did adjust and took a little bit out of Luke's hands when it was clear this is not a day where you're going to just be passing it left and right like you would maybe like to. All in all, not a perfect day against Northwestern. Didn't have to be. We're not a program that needs perfection right now. We need wins, and you got wins, and you got 9 of them. So what a place to be. Cheers to you, Illini fans. Cheers to you. My third sip of Georgie Dickel on this cold and cloudy Saturday that feels a lot better than the weather outside with Illinois at 9-3. All right, so what's next? Next week, we will do a midweek podcast of some kind. Probably both a reflection on Illini basketball and Illini football. It's an off week, essentially. You don't play Northwestern in basketball until next Friday. No football game, of course. You're done until presumably the Citrus. I'm going to be looking up my other details about a Citrus Bowl trip. I'm going, man. I'm going. The beauty of winter break, I can come back and still have a few days before school gets going. I just feel like with Illini football, part of the reason I went to Tampa as well, when these opportunities present themselves, I want to maximize it. I want to be there. I want to experience it. And what a cool opportunity to be able to do that at a bowl game that does have some cachet. It really does. And I am hoping, and we'll know I don't think until next Sunday, but I'm hoping it's Alabama. I'm watching the Georgia game last night as they about blow it to Georgia Tech, but won in 8 overtimes, thus preserving Illinois' 9 overtime record. How about that? But I want the biggest brand name with the most opt-outs that doesn't want to be there. And even if you just hang against Alabama, that's a win. And I actually think that depending on the mindset going into the game, which I think will be a team that doesn't want to be there from the SEC because they would have been the outside looking in of the playoff. To me, great opportunity. Now, it could happen where the other team for the SEC, instead of being not want to be there, they actually come in pissed off and they want to prove something. But I'm not throwing shade at Illinois. I just think it would be easy for an SEC team to look at Illinois and say, whatever. And that's a good place to be in if you want to be the upset special of New Year's Eve. It's an opportunity for Illinois, and I think it's pretty cool. And time to get a bowl win. That's one thing Bielema has not gotten yet. Granted, only one appearance, and not the best bowl game against Mississippi State, especially offensively, but a cool opportunity awaiting them. And who would have thought? 9-3, Illinois football, some marquee wins along the way, some lifelong memories, a team that when Pat Bryant comes back to campus, for example, is going to get a rousing ovation, and deservedly so, because they made a legacy for themselves with big plays and big wins this year. And I hope it's the start of something. I think it's the start of something. The cool thing is I don't need it to be the start of playoff appearance after playoff appearance. I don't think any of us need it to be that. We just want fun falls. We want fun football Saturdays. And thanks to Bret Bielema, I think Illini football finally has that again in a way that I haven't really had in my lifetime, and I know a lot of Illini fans haven't either. I always heard about tailgate in the 80s. I don't know if it'll get back to that sort of rabid craziness that you got in the lots back in the Mike White era, but I will say for the Kansas and the Michigan games this year, there was a special buzz in the air around those lots. And when you go 9-3, that only feeds into the energy in the lots the year after. And think about this. All that energy that you had in the lots this year after a 5-win year, it won't take a lot to sustain that fan momentum, that energy. It won't take a lot. So you're in a good spot, Illini fans, and enjoy this. I know you are. I wanted to make this a celebratory podcast. Of course, I addressed the concerns of defense. It is what it is. You got an off season to figure it out, and hopefully they do. But to not bury the lead once more, Illinois football 9-3 and presumably heading to the Citrus Bowl in Orlando, Florida. That's a pretty awesome place to be. All right, everybody. Time to go hang with the fam as we wrap up our Thanksgiving weekend. From the Arkansas win Thursday to this one against Northwestern to secure a 9th win. Great week for Illini sports. It's a cool place to be when you consider after the Minnesota loss, you weren't really sure what football would do after the bye week in the last 3 games. Well, guess what? You won out. And then with some early returns with basketball, oh boy, are we going to be able to stack up against ranked teams, quality opponents? Well, you showed that, yes, you can do that, and you will continue to do that. Our sports program is in the best place that I can personally remember, and I'm not going to take that for granted. So remember, the 200 level here on this podcast, we will criticize when we feel it's necessary, but I am so happy to heap praise where it belongs. And I guess that goes without saying, Josh Whitman, the guy at the top, made these 3 hires, all of which are working out beautifully for football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. And that just trickles down to the rest of your program. It's a good day to be Illini. And what can I say? I mean, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, thankful, grateful. And I guess I'll see you in Orlando. Before I get out of here, got to remind you, hello, the 200 level is brought to you by Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign. Steak, seafood, and spirits, a great place for a celebratory meal and beverage tonight in downtown Champaign as the Parade of Lights is going on. Local tradition. That's Hamilton Walkers, Steak, Seafood, and Spirits in downtown Champaign. State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com for life, auto, home, business renters, you name it. Brian is my guy, and he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Give them a call at 217-841-4728. Get your furnace checked today before it gets even colder. I think this week is all going to be hovering around the 20s and the 30s. We're staying toasty thanks to the folks at Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. And finally, got to thank OM Builders LLC, online at ombuildersllc.com. Check out a gallery of their work online and get a free quote at ombuildersllc.com. Thank you for YouTube folks checking in on the Saturday evening. Thank you as well for the listeners, wherever you're getting your podcast. Reminder, the 200-level book is available at both Game Day Spirit locations and Jane Addams Bookstore in downtown Champaign, and on Amazon if you are not local here in Champaign-Urbana. All right, everybody, have a good rest of your Thanksgiving weekend. Illinois football 9-3. I'm not going to get tired of saying that. And we'll see you later this week for a midweek episode. It is the 200 level. All right. Thanks, YouTube. Take care. Have a good rest of your night.